You know, you have to have gashmias and
Meaning?
there's the spiritual and whatever your bodily needs. That's
Gashmis
man.
means spiritual, yeah.
No, gashmias means non-spiritual, like
Non-spiritual.
yeah. And ruchnius is the spiritual.
Spiritual.
Bodily needs and you mit the ruchniusness, the spiritual needs for if you know.
And the reish?
Tamar. That's the reish.
I see. I got you.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
used to say. Okay, let us begin. We are on Daf Ches Amud Sheni in Masechta Beya, and it's today's Daf will be nice and smooth. We are on the last line of the page. So we discussed before. The Gemara says like this: you're allowed to shech the bird on Yontiv, right? And when you shech the bird, a chicken, let's use an example. There's a mitzvah of kisui hadam. That means that you have to cover the blood. If you have to cover the blood after you slaughter the chicken. So slaughtering a chicken on Yontiv, if you have the prepared dirt bag, let's say you have little dirt on your table, you're allowed to take the dirt on your table and sprinkle the dirt onto the blood. That's a mitzvah in the Torah to cover the blood. So Amar Rabba, Rabba said, Shochat Tzipor Erev Yontiv. Let's say on the eve of Yontiv, the day before Yontiv, you shechted a chicken, right? You're not permitted to cover the blood on Yontiv. Let's say you forgot to do kisu hadam, you forgot to cover the blood. So comes Yontiv, you're not allowed to cover the blood. Why? It's just taking dirt off your table and covering blood. So there's something called tircha yesera, something that you're going to, it's like extra work, something that keeps you busy. And therefore, that's Issa D'Rabbanan. And since you could have been more astute and attentive to what you were doing, you should have done the Kisu Hadam Erev Yom Tov. Why did you wait till Yom Tov to do the Kisu Hadam? So therefore, you're not allowed to do Kisu Hadam on Yom Tov. Very important point. You're still allowed to eat the chicken. You just missed the mitzvah of Kisu Hadam. Chazal are telling you, don't do the mitzvah of Kisu Hadam because of a drabanan of extra work on Yom Tov. That's only if you slaughtered the bird on Erev Yom Tov. If you slaughtered the bird on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do Kisei Adam. Now we go to Daf Tesam and Aleph. Now there's a mitzvah in the Torah, of course, to give challah. When you make a dough, you have to take off a piece for challah. There's also a mitzvah, let's say you have apples and you didn't give off trumas and masras. So then there's a mitzvah, you have to give off trumas and maasros, but you're not allowed to do so on Yom Tov because it looks like you're fixing. You're taking by taking out and separating trumas and maasros on a basket of fruit, the rest of the fruit becomes mutter to eat. So that's not permitted to do. The Chazal said you're not allowed to take off trumas and maasros on Yom Tov. If you make a dough on Yom Tov, you're allowed to separate challah on Yom Tov. Here, you make a dough on Yom Tov. So then, and you're baking, let's say, a bread on Yom Tov, you're allowed to take off challah. Why? To give to the Kohen. What's the difference? Because since it's a mitzvah, because you want to have fresh food on Yom Tov, so if you want fresh fruit on Yom Tov, Chazal did not impede this, the mitzvah of giving off challah, because they didn't want you to bake everything on Erev Yom Tov. They want you to bake things on Yom Tov, and therefore they didn't stop you from giving off challah from a dough that you needed on Yom Tov itself. So it comes along the Gemara and says, Gilgal Isa me'erev Yom Tov. If you needed a dough on Erev Yom Tov, right? So now you should have given off challah on Erev Yom Tov. You should have separated challah on Erev Yom Tov. Nevertheless, marfresh mimena chalasa b'Yom Tov. You're allowed to take off challah on from that dough on Yom Tov itself. Very different than Kisei Adam. Remember, Kisei Adam, we said just a moment ago, if you shech the tzipar on Erev Yom Tov, bird, you're not allowed to do Kisei Adam on Yom Tov. Here, if you needed the dough on Erev Yom Tov, you're allowed to take off challah on Yom Tov. And the reason simple is because even if you made the dough on Yom Tov, if you needed a dough on Yom Tov itself, you're allowed to take off challah on Yom Tov itself. So if you needed it in Erev Yom Tov, if you forgot to take off challah, you're allowed to take off the challah on Yom Tov itself. Comes along Avua de Shmuel Amar, the father of Shmuel. We don't know exactly what his name is. I mean, we know his name is, but we always refer to him as the father of Shmuel because there were rumors that Shmuel was born out of wedlock. There was some rumors. So in order to establish firmly in your mind that Shmuel had a tzaddik of a father, we always refer to, and anytime his father says something in the Gemara, as Avuha to Shmuel, the father of Shmuel. So he's of the opinion, afilu gilgal isim erev yontiv, even if you needed a dove on erev yontiv, ein mafresh mimena chalasa b'yontiv. You're not allowed to take off chala on yontiv, okay? Because you should have done it erev yontiv. What are you taking off chala on yontiv? It looks like you're fixing the dough to eat on yontiv. So the Gemara says, Lema, would you say, pligi de Shmuel adavua, that Shmuel would argue against his father? Would Shmuel argue against his father? The Amar Shmuel, Shmuel said, Chalas chutz la'aretz oichel v'hoylech v'achakach mafresh. Shmuel said that chala, a dough from chutz la'aretz, you're allowed to eat the dough and give off chala at the end. In other words, the dough of something made in New York, like a dough of something made in New York, it's not chayiv chala midaraisa. Daraisa only minatora, only if it's a dough from Israel is chayiv chala. Here in New York, it's only chayiv midrabanan. So therefore, you're allowed to continue to eat and leave over something for chala. It's not so important to be mafresh chala. I'll give you an example. You go to it doesn't exist so much today, but you used to go to a goyish bagel store, but the bagels you knew were kosher, but they didn't take off challah. So you could eat the bagels and just leave over a little bit, and you call that challah. So what do you see from Shmuel? Shmuel says that the hafrasha, the separating of challah from a dough made in chutz la'aretz is only like, a showman. It's not really anything. It's not really a hafrasha. So Shmuel will hold that even if you needed a dough in Erev Yontif, you could be mafresh on Yontif because you're not really doing anything. The hafrasha is not so important. Separating is not so important. That's what the Gemara is thinking now in its Havamina, that Shmuel will argue against his father. The father of Shmuel said, if you need a dough on Erev Yontif, you can't be mafresh that on Yontif. You can't take off chal on Yontif. And Shmuel would seem to hold that it's not so important to take off challah. Taking off challah is not such a malacha. It's not such a tircha. It's not a fixing of the dough, and therefore Shmuel would hold that even if you made the dough on erev yontiv, you could take off the challah on yontiv. Amar Rava says, "Mi loy moide Shmuel." Wouldn't Shmuel agree? Shemkara aleha shem, that if you actually announce that this piece is challah sha'asur l'zarm, it's asur for a non-kohen, Shmuel would agree that even a chalas that are made in chutz la'aretz, a chalas chutz la'aretz, a dough in New York, right? If you decide to take off a piece of that and say this is challah, this is going to the kohen, that piece becomes asur to a non-kohen, and therefore hafrasha is considered something. It's considered like you're doing something, fixing something. Technically, you could eat the bread and not be mafresh challah, just leave over something at the end. But if you do hafrasha, if you do separate it, it becomes asur for a non-kohen. So therefore, Shmuel would also agree to his father's opinion that even if you needed a dough on erev yontiv, you're not supposed to mafresh challah on yontiv, because that looks like you're fixing a dough on yontiv, because by taking off a piece, that piece becomes asur for a non-kohen. It looks like you're making permissible the rest of the dough to eat. So therefore, Shmuel would agree probably with his father that you cannot be mafresh challah from a dough that was needed on erev yontiv. Okay, new Mishnah. Hello, Sheldon. Hi. We're starting the new Mishnah on Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Beis Shammai Oimrim. So here's the picture. You have a ladder. And this is a ladder that is specifically used for, this is called a dove cote or a bird coop. So the question is, can you carry a ladder from one coop to the other coop on Yontiv? Looks like, we'll see what the reason is. Let's see what the Mishnah says. Beit Shammai says, Ein melichin as a sulam, you're not allowed to carry a ladder, mishoivech, from one coop, one bird coop, l'shoivech, to the other bird coop. That's what I'm just showing you in the picture. The ladder over here to carry it from one coop to the other coop. But Beis Hillel is going to say, Beis Hillel, you're not allowed to carry it from one coop to another, but you're allowed to move it from one window to another window. What's one window to another window? So take a look at the picture. Here it is. Here's a coop. And in one coop you have different windows. So you're allowed to move the ladder around one coop, but you're not allowed to drag it to another coop. Now, what would be the difference? Well, Beis Hillel says you're allowed to move the ladder from one coop to another coop. Of course, in one coop, you can move from one window to another. It's all permitted. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara thinks that the reason why we have to understand what's the reason of Beis Shammai. You're using a specific ladder that was only used for coops. So everybody knows that this ladder you're just taking birds to use on Yom Tov. Why should you not be allowed to do that? Amar Rav Chana bar Ami, machlokes b'reshus harabim. The machlokes is, are you allowed to carry that ladder in a public domain? Let's say your friend had a coop and you're carrying the ladder to your chicken coop. The Beis Shammai says, Savre, Haroya, if someone sees you carrying that ladder in the street, everybody's going to think you're using that ladder to do roofing on your roof, smoothing out the roof, tarring your roof cement, and that's not permitted on Yom Tov. So people see you carrying a ladder in the street, they'll think that you're coming to do a malacha on Yom Tov. Therefore, Beis Shammai says don't carry a ladder through a public domain. So what's the Beis Hillel's reasoning? Because everybody can tell this is not a work ladder that you use. It's a specific ladder used only for bird coops. So everybody knows that once they see the type of ladder that you're carrying in the street, they know that you're not going to do a work. You're not doing roofing on your roof. So therefore, the fact that everybody can see it's a certain type of ladder, that will be proof enough that you're not doing work on Yom Tov. So that is the argument. The machlokes specifically is only in a public domain. Are you allowed to carry that ladder?
But within your house, you can move it. Let's say you have more than one chicken coop.
There you go. That's right here. Avol b'reshus hayachid. B'reshus hayachid divrei hakol mutar. Everybody would agree that would be permitted. Even Beit Shammai would agree that would be permitted in your own private house, like in the picture. In the picture we saw over here, it's his own private house. Even Beit Shammai would agree you're allowed to move it. Okay. Notice how in this picture they define like a ladder that's used for getting birds out of the coop. It narrows at the top, and here a different type of ladder is used for going to your roof. So that was the ladder that people think you're coming to fix your roof. That's why Beit Shammai said don't carry it in the street, but you can carry it from one place to another. That is the first opinion. The first way so the Gemara says, Eini, how could that be? That's not true. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, and Rav is the leader of Klal Yisrael. So Rav could you can't argue against Rav. Rav said a statement. Whenever the Chachamim say, don't do something because of appearances, right? We're talking about Maras Ha'ayin. This is appearance. People are going to make the mistake that you're going to do roofing on your roof on Yom Tov. So afilu b'chadrei chadarim asar, even in your private house, it's asar. Since Chachamim said you can't carry in the Reshus Harabim, in the public domain, you should not be allowed to carry even in your private domain. Perhaps because maybe somebody will walk into your private domain, see you moving around ladders, and will think you're doing work. So this is a universal halacha. So how could you say that Reshus HaYachid, even Beis Shammai would say it's permitted? It should be asur. Once it's asur in the public domain, it should be asur in the private domain. So the Gemara says, Tanoi, that concept is a machlokes tanoim. It's a machlokes tanoim if something that is asur, that Chachamim said it's asur because of appearances, would it also be asur, prohibited in your private, house? Why? Let's give an example. The Tanya we learned in a Brisa. A man went through Hurricane Ida on Shabbos. Okay, and all his clothing got wet. So, shaytchim b'chama, you're allowed to dry up your clothing by setting it out in the sun. but do it in your own backyard. Don't do it on the street, because people are going to think you washed your clothing on Shabbos. So don't do it on the street because of Maras Ayin, but you're permitted to do it in your backyard. So we have a Tana that would argue against Rab that even things that are also on Maras Ayin is permitted in your private domain. So that is the opinion of the Tanakama. So Rab Lazar, Rab Shimon, Rab Lazar, Rab Shimon say that it's prohibited. Since it's also to do it in the public, it's also to do it in the private. So Rav went with Rab Lazar, Rab Shimon. And Rab Chanan, he had a Tana that agrees to him that those things could be also of Maras Ayin in the public domain. If you in the private domain, it would not be also. And that's why he says that Beis Shammai would hold that although it's also to carry the ladder in the public domain, he would agree that in the private domain, you're permitted to carry the ladder. But that was one version of what Rav Chanan said. Now we're going to give you another version of what Rav Chanan said. Ika de Amri, others said, Amar Rav Chanan bar Ami. Rav Chanan bar Ami said, Machloik is that the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is B'Reshus HaYachid, even in a Reshus Yachid. That means the Beis Shammai Islahu Rav Yehuda Rav. Beis Shammai aligns himself with the opinion of Yehuda of Amarav. In other words, Rav Yehuda Amarav got his opinion from Beis Shammai that once it was also in the public domain, it's also in the private domain. And our Mishnah is talking about in a private domain. And even in a private domain, Beis Shammai says it's also. Beis Hillel less lahud Rav Yehuda Amarav, and Beis Hillel holds not like Rav Yehuda Amarav. It's a private domain, so the rules of Maras Ayin don't apply. Aval B'Reshus Rabim, in a public domain, even Beis Hillel will hold Divrei HaKol Aser. In the public domain, everybody agrees it's Aser. Everybody agrees it's Aser because of the Maras Ayin. It looks like you're fixing your roof. But in the private domain, then Beis Shammai says it's Aser. Beis Hillel says it's Mutter. Beis Hillel says it's Mutter because it's in your own private house. Nobody's looking. And Beis Shammai says, no, anytime Chazal asked you to do something in the public domain because of appearances, it's also, it's prohibited also in the private domain. So that ends the Gemara. But the Gemara has one final question on that. Lema Rav the Omer Beis Shammai. Would you say that Rav aligns himself with the opinion of Beis Shammai? Because Rav is came later, and Beis Shammai, we never paskin like Beis Shammai. So, but Rav, who says something that's usher in the public domain, because of Maras Ayin, is usher in very, very private domain, would only align himself according to Beis Shammai. So that would be very difficult to understand. We always like to align ourselves to Beis Hillel. So the Gemara says, truthfully be told, Tanoi, it's Machlokes Tanoi, that whether something that's also because of Maras Ayin is also in the private domain, like we saw before. The Tanya, you're allowed to dry your clothing in the sun in your private backyard, but don't do it on the public domain in front of people. So it's permitted to do things in private. Rabbi Lazar Rab Shimon, Rabbi Lazar Rab Shimon says it's also under all circumstances, public or private domain. And therefore, there is a way to learn that Beit Shammai would not hold that something, and that Beis Shammai would hold that it would be usher, that Beis Hillel will hold that it's usher even in the private domain. There's a way to learn that a Rav would align himself according to Beis Hillel. Maybe there is no Maras Ayin over here, so there's another way to learn Beis Hillel that Rav wouldn't get involved in this machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. But really, in the end of the game over here, this idea of what Rav said, that if something is asar because of Maras Ayin, that really is a machlokes tanoim of the Tanakama and Rab Lezer. And Rav Chanan could say that I don't hold of Rav because I hold like the other Tana that holds that only in the public domain something is asar, but in the private domain it would remain permitted. We go to Tes Amud Sheni. So now the Gemara just goes off to a new point, and that will take us to the end of the page. Masnisin the Loika Haitana, our Mishnah that says that the argument is whether you can carry a ladder, right, is not like this Tana. Because the Tanya we learned in another brisa, there's another a tradition of what the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Amar Rab Shimon ben Elazar. Shimon ben Elazar said, "Moedim beishamei besila shemalichim esos shulam mishayvech l'shayvech." You're allowed to. Everybody agrees you're allowed to carry a ladder from one coop to another coop. In your, let's say, in your domain, even from your friend's place to your place, everybody agrees you can carry a ladder. What should be the isser? It looks like a coop ladder, so nobody's going to make that mistake. So that's not the argument. That's what Reb Shimon said. Everybody agrees you can carry a ladder in the street. The question is, can you return it? Once you finished using it, are you allowed to return it back? Beshami says, don't return it back because that's too much work, right? Carrying ladders in the street is heavy. It's heavy lifting. So therefore, don't return it. Beis Hillel says, you're allowed to return it. So that's the question, whether you can carry back the ladder that you took from your friend. So this is the way Rab Shimon ben Elazar had a tradition of what the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is. So our Mishnah is not like that. Our version in our Mishnah of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is not like this version. The Brisa continues and said, Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, when was there an argument? The Sulam shel Shoivach, when you're carrying a ladder, a coop ladder. Aval b'sulam shel aliyah. But if you want to use a ladder that's meant to go to your roof, divrei hakol aser, then everybody would agree you're not allowed to borrow your friend's roof ladder to bring to your coop. That everybody would agree it's aser. It would seem that Rabbi Yehuda is explaining the Tanna Kama, but it's very possible to learn that the Tanna Kama holds carrying ladders in the street is not a problem, even a roof ladder. It's possible to learn that way. We'll see more about that in a moment. Rabbi Yossi says, Mateu mechaloin lechaloin. You're allowed to bend the ladder to go from one window to another window. In other words, like we saw over here, he says you can't carry a ladder in the street. That's for sure. But you're allowed to, bend the ladder to tilt it to go to the next window over here. That's what Rav Doisi says. And then we have Acherim or Mushum Rav Doisa af medadin boy. You're allowed to lift it a little bit off the ground to move it from one window to another window. But to bring it from one coop to another coop, Rav Doisi seems to be very strict about that. So this is a whole different version of what the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and it would seem that they would agree that in the way Rab Shimon ben Elazar learned that there are a lot of carry ladders in the street. The question was, can you return it back to your friend? The Gemara tells a story. Bnei Rabbi Chia, the sons of Rabbi Chia, nafuk l'kiryasa. They were working like sons of Rabbanim should work, and therefore they went to their fields to check up on the workers. But when you're a son of a rabbi, so people come and ask you questions. They figure you're a Talmud Chacham. So Kiasi, when they came back home, Amaluhu Avun, their father said, Reb Chia said to his two sons, right? I think their name is Cheskia and Yehuda. He said to his sons, Klum ma'aseh bo liyadchem. Did anybody ask you any questions while you're out in the field, doing work, right? In the business? Did anybody ask you a question on halacha? Amrulai, so they told their father, yes, somebody did ask us a question. Sulam bali yadenu, a story about a ladder came to us. Are you allowed to carry a ladder in the street? Any ladder, let's say a roof ladder in the street. Are you allowed to, somebody wants to borrow a roof ladder on Yom Tiv to use that roof ladder for his bird coop, to take out a bird. So he said, so somebody asked them a question, Vitarnuhu, and we said it was permitted. So that they said it was permitted. Amalahem, so Reb Chia told his kids, to go back, the Isru Mashi Tartem, and prohibit what you gave a heter for. You're wrong in halacha. So why were they wrong in halacha? They obviously had a source. In Husavar, they hold Midika Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'sulam shel aliyah loy pligi. Since Rabbi Yehuda said that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel all agree that a sulam that is made for the roof, no argument on that it's aser, michlal, the Tanna Kama savar pligi. The Tanna Kama holds that they are arguing, and therefore the Tanna Kama, according to the Brisa, it would seem that the Tanna Kama would hold that you're permitted to carry even a roof ladder in the street. You see, when you learn this brisa, Omer Rabbi Yehuda b'med devar marurim, you think Rabbi Yehuda is coming to argue, and therefore the Tanakama holds you're allowed to carry any ladder in the street, even if it's not a coop ladder. The question was whether you're allowed to return it. Rabbi Yehuda says no, a roof ladder everybody holds is also, but Tanakama, the first Tana, would hold it's permitted. That's the way they learned this brisa. But Rabbi Chia, the father, said v'lohi. That's not true. You learned it wrong. Rabbi Yehuda time the Tanakama kumafarsh. Rabbi Yehuda is just explaining what the opinion of the Tanakama. He's not arguing. He's just explaining and modifying what the Tanakama meant to say. The mimai, and therefore even the Tanakama would hold that a roof ladder is usher. So the Gemara says mimai. How do you know that the Tanakama was not talking about a roof ladder? Midiktoni, because the Tanakama says, Malichin esasulam mishoivach l'shoivach. You're allowed to carry a ladder from one coop to another coop. So they must be talking about what type of ladder? A coop ladder, a bird coop ladder. If you want to say that the Tanakama was talking about even a ladder that's used for roofs, why are they saying you're allowed to move a ladder from one coop to another coop? You're using a roof ladder. It should say you're allowed to carry the ladder from your garage to the coop. So that's what the Tanakama should be saying, that you're carrying the ladder from your roof, from your backyard to the coop, from somebody's backyard. Elalah, it must be that even the Tanakama holds a roof ladder is also asar. Hachikama. Shall shoivech en, only a ladder that's designated to use for bird coops, yes. Shall aliyah loy, you're not allowed to use a roof ladder at all. That's so. The father of Chia corrected his kids in saying that nobody would agree that a roof ladder is permitted. That's what Reb Chia corrected his son. The idach. What about the kids? What did they learn? They said maybe my father is not correct. Mikitani doesn't say in the Brisa sulam shel shoivach, a ladder from a coop. It says moving a ladder mishoivach l'shoivach, from one coop to another coop. So maybe it's talking about a roof ladder that happened to be. And then what's the point? You're allowed to move it even to many coops. In other words, you go to your friend, you borrow a ladder that's meant for a roof. You carry it to your street and you bring it to your coop, and then you're allowed to carry it to another coop in your yard. That's what the Bryce is talking. Move it around. You can keep it and move it around. The only question is, can you return it? So that's the story so far. The story so far is when you learn this Bryce simply, I would agree with Reb Chia that the Bryce, nobody would agree that you're allowed to go to your friend and borrow a roof ladder to bring it to use for your coop, to your bird coop. But they had the opinion that the Tanakama would even permit carrying a roof ladder, taking it from the guy's backyard and bringing it to your bird coop. That's what the children of Reb Chia learned. Now the Gemara continues and says, Ika de Amri, and others say that the story was this, that the Bnei Reb Chia came back to their father and said, no, a different story. Somebody asked us the different question. Hitu sulam shalaliyah baliyadenu. Can we move a sulam of an aliyah? In other words, somebody brought a roof ladder before Yom Tiv to a bird coop. So he brought imagine this is a roof ladder. That was the question was, can you tilt it, the roof ladder, once it's here already, can you tilt it to the other hole? Now, a roof ladder should be usher, right? But it happened to have been there before Yom Tiv. So vihi tarnuhu, we permitted it. Once it's there already, obviously you can't bring it there on Yom Tiv, like we're saying all this time, but once it's there, you're allowed to tilt it to the other hole. Amalehem, so Reb Chia said, Su'uv isru mashi tartan. Go tell him you're not allowed to even touch and move a roof ladder, even if it's by a coop. So what did they hold? Inu Savar, the kids held, my deka'asa Tanakama, Koshari Rab Daisi. In other words, Rabbi, when you learn this Bryce and go a little step further, Rabbi Yehuda said, a sulam shel aliyah, a roof ladder is always asa. Rab Daisi says, yeah, once you have a roof ladder there, you can't carry a roof ladder, but you're allowed to tilt it and move it from one window to another window. That's how they learned this Bryce. But Rabbi Chia says, "V'lohi, you learned it wrong." Ma de kashari Tanakama ko asa Rabbi Yosi. What the Tanakama Rabbi Yehuda said, you're allowed to carry a coop ladder. You're allowed to carry a coop ladder. Rabbi Yosi is very strict. You're not allowed to even carry a coop ladder in the street. But then they weren't talking about a roof ladder. Roof ladder for sure is asa. The question is, can you carry a coop ladder? And Rabbi Yehuda says you can carry a coop ladder. But Rabbi Daisa says you can't even carry a coop ladder. The only question is, can you tilt it to the other window? All these questions. Next Mishnah. Next part of the Gemara, and that will take us to just through a few more lines. In the Mishnah it said that Rabbi Yehuda, again, Beis Shammai says you have let's learn Pshat the way our Mishnah has it, a coop ladder, right? You have a coop ladder. You're not allowed to carry the coop ladder, but once it's there, you're allowed to move it from one window to the other window, right? That's what it says over here. So, but why? So who's more strict? Rabbi Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai is more strict and said that although we're dealing here with Simchas Yontif, taking birds out of a coop on Yontif, and Beis Shammai is strict that if you don't have a ladder there, you can't move it from one coop to another. So because Chazal said this looks like you're fixing your roof, so therefore don't touch. If you don't have a ladder there, you're going to have to give up having chicken or birds on for your Yontif meal. So Alma, so we see from here, Gabi Simchas Yontif, enjoying the Yontif, Beis Shammai is l'chumra. Beis Shammai is very strict and says that don't be over in Isur D'Rabbanan for Simchas Yontif. In other words, even though we're dealing with being happy and Yontif, Chazal upheld their halachas of Maras Ayin, and therefore you're not allowed to move it. Beis Hillel l'kula. Beis Hillel is more lenient. Raminhu, then I'll ask you a stira where when it comes to Simchas Yontif, we say Beis Shammai is lenient and Beis Hillel is strict. Where do you see that? The Mishnah said, we had this before, if you sech a wild animal or bird on Yontif, and therefore you have the obligation to cover the blood with dirt. Beis Shammai said, you're allowed to shecht it, and if you have a shovel in the ground with appropriate dirt, then you're not going to make a hole, yachbar, which is yachbar badeka, you're allowed to take with the shovel, and cover the blood. Since you have almost prepared blood, it's like it's already in the shovel, but the shovel's in the ground. So then you're permitted to cover the blood. So Beis Shammai says, Chazal weren't so strict. They want you to eat fresh chicken and meat on Yontif. Beis Hillel says, lo yishchat, don't shecht, elam kain hoyeloi afa mucha mibayim. The only way you can shecht, according to Beis Hillel, is if you have dirt on the table, but not dirt in the ground where you're going to have to lift the shovel a little bit to cover the blood. So Beis Hillel is strict and Beis Shammai is lenient. And in our Mishnah, it's the opposite. Beis Hillel is lenient and Beis Shammai is strict. Rabbi Yochanan said, Muchlefes Hashita, you have to turn around the opinions, you're right, in order to align themselves. So let's turn around our Mishnah. And where our Mishnah will say Beis Shammai is lenient and Beis Hillel is strict. In other words, switch around the names in our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Mimai, how do you know that you have to do that? How can you compare? I'll show you one difference. Dilma, maybe. Only by there, when it comes to covering the blood, Beis Shammai was lenient. Because you have already the shovel in the ground, and the dirt is already, partially in the shovel already. So there's no what Isser is there. So of course, Beis Shammai says cover the blood. But if you have no shovel in the ground, to now stick a shovel in the ground, it looks like you're doing malacha, even though the dirt is, there and you're not making a hole. Beis Shammai would not agree to that. And so also over here, perhaps Beis Shammai would be strict, and therefore that's why Beis Shammai is strict over here. By Simchas Yontif, they would say, if you don't have a ladder at that coop, don't bring it from somewhere else. Because that's already dealing with Isser Maras Ayin. Beis Shammai says, don't carry ladders on Yontif. That's why they're strict over here. The Inami, and I could say reverse. The reason why Beis Hillel is strict over there, because at the end, it looks like, even though you have if you had a shovel in the ground, perhaps maybe one time you're going to lift the shovel, you'll see the dirt is not, crushed. You're going to need to crumble it, and crumbling the dirt to make it appropriate to use to cover the blood is the Issa Drabanan. So don't deal with shovels on Yom Tov. That's why they're strict over there. But Adkan Lakamen B'Silahacha, over here, they're very lenient because the everybody can see that it's a coop ladder. Everybody can see the shape of the ladder shows it's a coop ladder. It's not a ladder that you go to climb to your roof. That's why Beis Hillel is lenient over here. Aval Hassam over there, Beis Hillel was strict because maybe you might, once the shovel's in the ground, you may take other dirt that's not readily usable for covering the blood, and you may crush the dirt. So therefore, Beis Hillel is strict over there, but could be lenient over here. So there's no proof. You could be strict in one place and lenient in another place. And that's so it's not stira. It's not a contradiction of opinions. Okay. Baruch Hashem, we finished Daf Tes.
Yeah, can I ask a couple of quick questions?
Yeah, sure.
Why is it, let's say that you're carrying a roof ladder to be used in the chicken coop. Why are you so concerned with Marav Yain and what others are going to say or think if you know that you're going to use it for permitted purpose?
Right.
Why does the Gemara place so much emphasis on what others will say, Marav Yain, I think you called it?
Okay, so that is a good question, because the question is that there are people who are not learned and draw conclusions from what other people are doing. Okay. That's if and let's say, because it's not so clear what the isser of roofing of smearing tar on your roof. What is that?
This is only Yontiv, correct?
Yontiv. Well, Yontiv and Shabbos are pretty much the same. Yeah. We find the same idea. Right. People don't know that you're not allowed to wash. If you ask,
understand?
Yeah. I'll ask my kids right now, and why can't you launder? Put the clothing into water on Shabbos, and they won't know why. Okay. Drop a water into it. It's malabin and something like that. So it's one of the lamates malachas. So people don't know.
Zayin meaning they're going
appearance.
to
appearance. Yeah. It looks like you're doing a work on Yom Tov, and people are going to say that. It's
understood. Understood. Yeah. Do you think you'll make a Talmud Chochem out of me, bro?
I'm sure if you stick with it, you'll be able to know a lot more than a lot of people. Yeah, it takes a lot of commitment for the Daf Yomi.
What?
It takes a lot of commitment for Daf Yomi.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Any possibility to start sooner than 8:45?
Yes. After Yom Tov, right after Yom Tov, we'll go back to 8:30. Mitzvah Shem. Just maybe to Chalamoid or whatever. So I don't know how much we're going to do before, maybe a little bit before Yom Kippur, and maybe one time during Chol Hamoed. Well, I'll try it, but then we'll go back to 8:30. Absolutely.
From 8:30 to what?
9 o'clock. We try to do 35 minutes. If you look online, all these things are 30, 33, 40. And it depends on the daf. Sometimes these dafim are hard, but we try to keep it under 40 minutes.
You said it's not a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's a big difference. To go to take the leather from one place to another. It's not allowed in Shabbos.
Yes, and Yom Tov also.
But Yom is not Shabbos more. Shabbos are so and it's different. It's more strict than Yom Tov.
Yeah, well, first of all, we're not Avad Shabbos. You can't carry the ladder for sure. You're not allowed to shecht on Shabbos. He's reaching for these birds to shecht them. That's the point. But when he's carrying the ladder, people don't know he's taking it to the bird. People think he's taking it to his roof, to fix his roof on Yom Tov.
Yes, no, we wait Yom to cover the psicha.
Yeah.
That's my father-in-law hanging out with.
Yes. He speaks Yiddish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so you can speak in Yiddish. What are you telling me? Speaking Yiddish.
I can read in Yiddish.
Do that in Yiddish. We're only b'diavad speaking English here. Well, mir redt Yiddish, du.
Du redt mir nicht Jiddisch, du redt mir Mama loschen. Man versteht nicht gut nicht. Andere Sachen versteht man nicht, nur Jiddisch.
Bei uns hat man gelernt, in Polish, ich bin von Polen. In Polen nur in Jiddisch, alles in Jiddisch versteht.
Ja, nicht nur in Polen, in Uruguay, in Amerika hat man gelernt, mit übergeteilte Sachen, alle Sachen in Jiddisch.
Ja.
Von Hybrid, von alles sind in Jiddisch.
Ja.
In der Dvartoides in Schielen Shabbos pflegt man die Commentaries machen in Jiddisch. Wenn ich bin gekommen in Amerika, habe ich gesehen, als man gibt Dvartoides in English, habe ich gesagt, man sucht das in English. And he said to me, "Who's willst in French? This is America." But I was used to Yiddish, but not Yiddish.
Als Sachmuel, der gelernt ist, Daf Yomi in Shabbos und gelernt. Die Gemurus ist gewähnt Sachen, wo der Rabbi, was hat gelernt und verstanden, hat gesagt in einem anderen Buch, was hat gelernt mit ihm zusammen, die war geschickt dort auf Englisch, dort versteht, the English explanation is more than in Yiddish.
Ich habe nicht gehört. Was hat er gesagt, der Bus?
He understood it better in English than in the Yiddish explanation. Ah.
In the Gemara is more than in Yiddish.
Ah.
Understand better. This man is on in Yiddish, in English, very good. And he didn't have a Gemara with English, only in Hebrew. So he asked the other one, please take a look over there, what brings out in Hebrew. In Hebrew explanation was explaining to us everything with exactly how it is.
Ha, ha. Where you from? Wie stammt ihr?
From Poland.
Wie in Poland?
The Klosberg Rebbe was when at my schuchen.
Ah.
Für wer nicht?
Rebbe and my Vater sind die beste Freund. Der Rebbe hat gesagt, leise ist mein bester Freund.
Welcher Rebbe? The
Klosberger.
Oh, wow.
Ja.
Ich habe gehad der Bruche von der Klosenberger Rebbe. Wenn es gewesen in Union City, in New Jersey, ich habe gegeben, mein Rebbe hat gebringt zu ihm, hat mir gegeben eine große Bruche. Ah, wow.
In der Bruche in Union City, bevor auf Kassel gegangen. Hat mir in der Bruche, hat mir gekannt als Kind. Ja, Karl, was machst du? So hat mir in der rechten Hand gehalten mir.
Wow.
Sind noch du ein Tomaschow Rebbe?
No, Klosenberg.
Se du ein Rebbe von Tomaschow? Tomaschow Lublin?
So kennt die ganze Family, die Klosberg.
Ja.
In der Mitte, in der Brüder haben gelebt bevor der Krieg.
Wow.
In den Krieg haben die Deutschen gehalten.
Ja. Yes, yes.
In der Tomaschow?
No, Klosenberg.
Aber se existiert han der Tomaschow Rebbe?
No, there is no. They all killed out. They were all killed out. Very nice. Nice to meet you.
I heard there was a Tomaschow Rebbe in Brooklyn some years ago.
Tomaschow noch in Belzer Rebbe bin ich gewesen.
Wow.
In Yisroel. Bin gegangen zum Belzer Rebbe. Dieser Schames, aber ich suche den Schames mal genommen, wer ich bin. Hat mich bald herangerufen zum Rebbe.
Wow.
Was kennt mein Futter? Ich bin von Belz.
Wow. Wow. Lange Juren, that's what I can say. Lange Juren, the Sach, Nagzinzan. So nice to see you. I get the Nacht. I get Nacht and I get in Shabbos. Get you.
Hey.
Thank you, Louis. That was so nice.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.